again. My name is Dr. Mohan. We just talked as we were walking through Chapter 7, and now I'm going to introduce you to Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is a topic, if you recall from my introduction, something that's very near and dear to me. It's specifically about new products, how we develop new products, how we manage those products once they're in the marketplace, all in the efforts of keeping our customers happy and so that companies can derive a profit. So before we get into the chapter, I'd like to take you through an interactive exercise where I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. In fact, I'm going to ask you to guess what this product might be. And how I'm going to do it is I'm going to show you a tiny little cropped image of a bigger picture. And based on that cropped image, it's not going to reveal much, but I think it's still going to be fun. I'm going to have you try to think about what the product might be. All right, so take a few seconds when you see this and see if you can think about what this product might be based on what you're seeing right now on the screen. Now, if you were in a typical classroom environment, at least based on my prior experiences, students typically look at what they're seeing and say, is that something akin to a bracelet on a watch, or is that some sort of jewelry? And those are all natural responses, right? Because you're looking at some polished metal. It looks fairly intricate. But in reality, and some of you may have come up with the right guess over here, it's a hinge for a laptop, specifically a laptop that came out a few years ago. And it's one of those hinges that gives the laptop kind of an infinite adjustment on its screen or its display, right? So let's do one more of these, and then we'll get back to why I want you to think about some of these images in a little bit more detail. So here's the second image. Once again, I'm going to show you a cropped part of the image, and I want you to guess what the product might be. So again, if you were in a class, what my students would typically say are things like, is that part of a basket, maybe a handbag? You can almost see the woven leather kind of look to it. I've even heard some maybe not so common examples that have been thrown around or guesses thrown around. Things like, is it furniture? Is it outdoor patio furniture and things like that? But in fact, again, some of you may have guessed right, but this is a pair of sneakers, right? Specifically a pair of Jordans. I want to say this came out in 2011 or 2012. I can assure you this is not my style, but it's still an interesting product when you think about it. Specifically the upper of the shoes, why the Jordan brand would have gone forward with a design such as this. It's also interesting when you look at the asymmetrical lace pattern. So the question I want you to ask is, what forced brands like Jordan and Lenovo, who made the laptop I showed you first, to create products such as these? If you think about Lenovo, they mostly make laptops for business customers. Sure, they do sell laptops to consumers, but what was the need to put in a hinge mechanism as intricate as the one they had in that particular example? And again, Jordan, it's a very famous brand, obviously. A lot of people own pairs of Jordans. But why would they choose to go with something like the one we see in front of us? And so that's a lot of what new product is all about, or new product development is all about. How are companies strategizing around the development of new offerings that they can take into the marketplace? What's motivating them to make certain types of decisions that result in products like this? And once these products are out there, are they successful? What are the levers companies can use to make sure that these products maintain success or maintain some profits? And ultimately, how do you take them out of the market once the demand starts to slow down? So those are some of the things I'd like to take you through in Chapter 8. I'm going to focus on two of the objectives that your textbook lists out. So the first one is I'm going to give you an overview of the new product development process. Now, it's hard to really synthesize it into a couple of minutes, but I will give you a bird's eye view of what's going on, kind of the process and how it unfolds, and how each step is really critical in ensuring that once we get into the marketplace, we have a product that stands a chance at succeeding. And the second objective that I'm going to focus on is, well, once it's out there, once a product is out there, what do we do to make sure that it's as successful as it can be? And one of the key concepts that we keep talking about in marketing is this idea of a product life cycle. It's this understanding that products go through various stages during its life, and how we as managers can potentially maximize the performance of this product in the market as it goes through these various stages. So let's jump right in to really understand what the new product development process is all about. But before we do that, we really need to take a step backwards and understand it from a much more macro perspective, kind of the bird's eye view, if you will. Product development is really just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to deriving profits from products that we introduce into the marketplace. What we really want to think about is this concept known as product planning. And product planning represents kind of an umbrella term that encompasses both product management and product development. So if you think about it, we develop products first, we introduce them in the marketplace, and then we go about managing them. And it's critical that we get these two pieces right. So it's that first piece, the product development piece, that I'm going to walk you through, specifically the process that it entails. Now, one way to think about processes is to think about, well, what is the desired outcome? What do we hope to achieve by going through a process, by enacting a strategy that has specific points to it? Well, in the case of new product development, the outcome is pretty clear. It's not very ambiguous, if you will. What we're trying to do is come up with an original new product, or an improvement to a product, or some sort of product modification, or even perhaps a new brand that we can take out into the marketplace. Now, as you can imagine, it's easy to state that outcome, but if you take a look at the process, it has very defined steps that we have to take. There's really no way to short-circuit this process. It's important that we put in all our effort or as much resource as we can into each of these steps in order to achieve a desirable outcome. So the new product development process, as you see it in front of you, consists of 8 steps, or 8 stages if you want to think of it that way. And it's a fairly intuitive process. As you look at each of these boxes and how they flow from one to the next, it seems natural, it seems organic. At least it makes business sense as to why we would choose to go about the process of developing a new product in this particular fashion or in this particular order. So let's jump right into this process. As you can see, the first step is idea generation. Now, with any outcome that comes out of a process, it's critical to get the very first step correct, or to get it right, if you will. If you get that first step wrong, no matter what you do later on, your end result is always going to be a little bit worse off than what you might have wanted. So idea generation, it's an important step. It's an important stage, not just because it's first, but because it's now going to dictate what happens in subsequent stages. So you might wonder, well, how exactly is it that companies go about generating an idea that they can then turn into an actual new product down the road? So believe it or not, how companies think about generating new ideas, or the strategies they deploy to generate new ideas, are very similar to what you and I might do when people ask us to come up with a new idea. So for example, if someone asks me to come up with a new idea, I immediately sit down and I'm starting to brainstorm things. I might be jotting down some notes, trying to get my creative juices flowing, just so I can try to come up with something novel, something interesting, something unique. So what a business might do is take that idea and apply a bit more structure to it. And in applying a little bit more structure to it, what they're really doing is providing their employees as many tools as possible so that they have multiple avenues through which to generate new ideas. So as you can see in the slide in front of you, there are a vast number of techniques that one could use or a business could deploy. Some of these are very straightforward. Some of these might be new to you. But some, I would say, are easier to execute than others might be. Now, there's some low-hanging fruit that are available to businesses when they want to generate a new idea. So for example, things like examining your current operations. How is everything being deployed? How is everything going about in your factory? How are your current processes looking? Are there certain underutilized resources that you could take advantage of that might be the impetus for a new product? That's something you could always look for. Now, at the same time, you might have things that are new to you. So for example, your company might have just acquired another company, and that new company that you've just merged with or acquired has certain resources that you didn't have available to you previously. Now, could you use those new resources to perhaps build something new? So there's always a resource angle to idea generation, just looking to see what you have available, what you're not using as efficiently as you could be, or is there something new that's come about that you could potentially use to your advantage in developing new ideas? Now, there could be mandates that come about. The term right here that I use is external mandates. So think about how governments oftentimes will come about and say, well, we want our companies to focus on X, Y, and Z. Now, whenever these kind of edicts come down or mandates come down, it represents an opportunity for a company to generate new ideas. They might be forced into an area where they have to think outside of the box, break from tradition, and consider a new avenue for product development. So there's always external mandates you can rely on. In fact, when consumers' tastes, preferences, and desires tend to change over time, which we've all witnessed, those are often external mandates that a company has to reckon with, right? So a lot of what a company needs to do when generating new ideas is to just look outside. Look to see what the market is wanting them to do. Look at what institutions like the government wants them to do. And they probably have to follow through, otherwise they're likely to fail. Now, other avenues, you could do an internal search for ideas, provide incentives for your employees to generate new ideas. You could have an innovation festival or a creativity festival at work where you just give everyone a day to have fun, come up with some new ideas, and that might, once again, deliver something that's truly unique that, if not given an opportunity to do so otherwise, these ideas may not necessarily have come up. Always ask your customers. That's one thing that we as marketers always try to drill down in our colleagues and people we work with. At the end of the day, we're trying to sell something to our customers. We've got to be asking what our customers want, what they desire, and that can lead to a lot of new ideas being generated. And then I would also argue, look to see what your competitors are doing. Sometimes your competitors have brilliant people working behind the scenes, and they're likely to come up with something first. Now, just because they came up with something first doesn't mean it's perfect, doesn't mean you can't necessarily follow suit. So look at what your competitors are doing as a source of opportunity or as a source of idea generation. So while one question is about how we generate new ideas, a second valid question is, well, how many new ideas do we need to generate? And the answer to that is quite simply, as many as you can. So with idea generation, you want to start really broad, amass a large set of ideas, and then as soon as you've done that, you start to screen out the ones that you think are not going to work. And so we have a funneling effect, if you will, where we really start broad and then funnel our way down to what are the most optimal solutions for our company and our customers. In an ideal world, I shouldn't say an ideal world, a hypothetical perfect world, we'd run with every idea we generated. But in reality, companies have a lot of constraints, and the number one constraint is resources. Whether it's money, whether it's labor, whether it's time, they're always resource constrained. And what that means is they need to be careful about which ideas they choose to move forward through the new product development process. Now, there's a lot of different techniques that one can employ as far as how to screen out ideas that you think are not going to work and how to identify ideas that you think are going to work. Companies don't necessarily rely on just one of these screening ideas. In fact, you want to hedge your bets. You want to cover your bases. And so what you might end up doing is using a combination of techniques in order to screen your ideas and select the ones that you really want to invest more money, time, and effort into. So once we've screened out our ideas, now it's time to start to figure out how we refine them, how we take them from the abstract to something a little bit more concrete. Because after all, ideas, they're really just words on a piece of paper, right? It's how any one of us might choose to describe this thing that we're thinking about. But that doesn't necessarily equate to a product. We've got to somehow start taking this abstract concept to a place where it's a lot more concrete, a lot more tangible, something that we can ultimately introduce into the marketplace. So our first goal, once we've come out of idea screening, is to turn our ideas into concepts. Concepts are, in some ways, a low-resolution version of what might be our ultimate product, right? The product that's going to come out of our entire process. So think of something that's very basic, that's very rudimentary. Again, I use the word low resolution. It's not something that we've poured a lot of resources into in making it look real nice and polished. It's very basic. It's just there to represent what a product might end up looking like if it were to go through all the various steps in our new product development process. So in some ways, you can think of it as taking an idea and refining it a little bit more. Taking an idea and providing a bit more structure to it. Taking an idea and hashing out its specific attributes, certain features it needs to have, and providing a bit more detail to what our original idea was. So once again, I like to think about each of these stages in terms of what it is we want in terms of an outcome. Once we start developing concepts and testing them, what is it that we want to pass on to the next stage? Or what is it that people working down the road in our process require so that they can then run with whatever idea or concept we've generated? And again, over here, what we're trying to do is quite simple. In a lot of ways, what businesses will try to do is, again, minimize the amount of money that they're putting into the process. By no means are you obligated to come up with something that's very polished, something that's a working prototype or anything along those lines. You perhaps could get away with a simple product concept statement, something that adds a bit more detail to what your concept is all about. Now, there's pretty much a standard framework how companies go about doing this. They try to come up with statements that describe concepts wherein the statement is going to touch on the general form of the product, might touch on certain technological aspects of the product, and most importantly, it'll try to highlight certain benefits that this product will ultimately yield for the consumer when they use it. Now, one thing that goes hand in hand with concept development is concept testing. In fact, it's our first opportunity to really test something in our product development process. By no means do we want to leave testing till the very end. The best practice when it comes to product development processes is to test early and to test often. And the first juncture where we get to do some testing is right here. As soon as we've developed some concepts, we want to try to put those concepts in the hands of our consumers and get some feedback from them. We want to get their thoughts. Oftentimes we might ask them things like, well, how believable is this concept? How unique do you think this concept is? Even though it's not a fully developed idea, at this point it might even be worthwhile asking consumers, would they buy it? If this were to ultimately come out into the marketplace, would they be interested in making a purchase decision that's in favor of the product? This is all information that's going to guide us as we go through subsequent stages in the product development process. Now, once we've come out of testing, as you can imagine, there might be certain concepts that just don't make the cut. So again, we see this funneling effect taking place. So with ideas, we amassed a large set of ideas, we screened a few out. We started developing concepts, and then once we test those concepts, again, some concepts are not going to make the cut, and there are going to be a handful that receive a go decision or a green light that then pushes them into the next stage in the product development process. So if you take a step backwards and take a look at the process so far, we've focused a lot on ideas and concepts, but we've perhaps in some ways neglected the need to really think through, well, what's the strategy here? How exactly are we going to put this product into the marketplace? Is there a business case behind what we're trying to do? And by business case, it often boils down to, are we going to be able to make money off of this? Are we going to see a return on our investment into this new product? And so those are what start to overtake the new product development process in the next two stages. So if you look at our process, we have a marketing strategy development aspect or angle, followed by a business analysis stage within the process. And so what's happening in these two parts of the process is that we're starting to solidify our strategy in terms of what's going to happen once this product goes out there. So from a marketing strategy angle, it's about really understanding, who are we going to sell this to? Who's our target market? What's our positioning strategy? How are we going to make sure that our product differentiates itself effectively? And when it comes to the business case, it's all about the financials. What are we putting in? What's our likely profits going to be? What's our likely revenue going to be? What are our costs going to be down the road? And based on these two pieces, we can start to think about, well, is there going to be a return on investment that makes this all worthwhile? So once concepts have a strategy and a business case to go with them that the company feels good about, then they really start pouring the resources into formally developing these products. So when we talk about product development, which is the sixth part of this process, this is just a lot of engineering work. This is where industrial engineers and others will come together to really figure out how do we take this concept and turn it into an actual product that we can put out into the marketplace for sale. Oftentimes, it's the part of the product development process that requires the most amount of capital investment, and by capital investment, I mean money. It's the stage that takes the longest amount of time because there's a lot of details that need to be ironed out. There's a lot of things that could go wrong that need to be fixed, and so it's just a stage in the process that tends to take time and requires a lot of resources. But once we come out of product development, again, we need to continue to test. And so before we launch this product, what might be considered a 90% finalized product, we've got to once again engage in some test marketing. Now we've got something very different from a concept that we tested early on. We have something that's as close to a finished product as you can get. And before you start producing this in mass, you want to take it out to the marketplace and once again, test out various aspects of your marketing program. So what this means is you're not just testing the product or giving the product in the hands of consumers to see what they think, but now you're going to start testing other aspects of your program, such as your promotions. Did you get your pricing right, or do you need tweaks to your pricing? What about your supply chain, your logistics, your distribution? How is the product going to go from your factory to the hands of the consumer? And so these are all things that we need to start considering before we finally commercialize this product or take it out into the marketplace. And that's really what the final stage is all about. It's about launching the product successfully. Now that in and of itself requires a whole strategy to it. It's not like you just select a date on a calendar and say, all right, that's going to be the day that we sell our product. In fact, companies are known to develop extensive launch protocols, perhaps create a lot of hype, excitement, buzz to coincide their new product's introduction into the marketplace. And so that would then represent the final part of the new product development process. So as you can tell, there's a lot that goes into it. So now that you have kind of an overview of the new product development process, let's go back to that initial slide where I talked about how product development is only one piece of the puzzle. We've got to think about product management. And this is where our second objective really comes in. Our second objective is all about understanding what we refer to as the product life cycle. And our ability as managers to really extract as much profit from our products, our new products, as we can, is dependent on our understanding of the product life cycle. So the product life cycle concept actually comes from a theory by the same name, product life cycle theory. And the theory in and of itself is fairly intuitive, fairly easy to understand. It basically suggests that products, much like human beings, go through various stages during the course of its life. So if you think about it from a human being's perspective, well, we go through various stages. We're young babies, toddlers, we grow up to be little kids, older kids, teenagers, so on and so forth. And with products, you could start to define certain stages that make up its life cycle. Question is, well, how might we start to define what those stages are? And what we do in the case of products is we look at the sales curve. We look at the sales curve of a product over the course of its life. And we start to notice that there are perhaps 4 stages that we can delineate or identify based on what the sales curve is doing at any given time. So the first stage is the introduction stage. This is when the product has just been introduced. And if you look at the sales curve in front of you, what you're going to notice is that in the introduction stage, the sales curve isn't very exciting to look at. It's picking up very slowly, and there's a lot of reasons behind this. It's possible that not very many people are aware that your product has been introduced. Maybe a lot of people do know your product is introduced, but they're just not willing to take a chance on it yet. Either way, there are going to be some people who are going to take a risk, who are going to make that plunge, and they're going to go forward with buying this new product that's available to them. But what you're going to notice is that very quickly, depending on how robust your marketing and promotional machinery is in terms of how much you're advertising, how much you're promoting, and perhaps how much of your early adopters are engaging in word-of-mouth behaviors, it might convince a completely different cohort of consumers to come in and be convinced that, yes, this is indeed the product for them. And that's where you see the sales curve really starting to pick up. And when we start to see this growth in the sales curve from when it's relatively flat and slow to pick up, we start to define, or we generally define the stage as the growth stage of the product's life cycle. Now, growth doesn't go on forever. As you can imagine, at some point, every product will peak and the sales curve will start to level out. And when we start to see that leveling out of the sales curve, most managers will start looking at it and come to the realization that their product is perhaps in maturity. Now, this could go on for a long time. The sales curve could remain flat for a while. In fact, in some products' cases, it could remain flat for an extended period of time. But in some products, in other products, you might have a case where it starts to dip down relatively quickly. Whenever that dip does happen is when we start to point out that, hey, we perhaps have entered into the final stage of our product's life cycle, which is the decline stage. And here it's all about, well, what do we do to extract the final few cents, final few dollars in terms of profit from our product before it's no longer viable? It doesn't make sense anymore to keep it into the marketplace, and then we choose to withdraw it. So as we look at these stages, you start to recognize that there are specific phenomena that, characterize these stages as I just described, but there are also certain strategies that come to the forefront in terms of what managers might be trying to do. So in the introduction stage, most managers are going to be concerning themselves not with profits, not with how slow the sales curve is rising, but with generating as much awareness as they can, getting as many people to try out the product as they can. So these are all critical things that marketing managers will look to do in the introduction stage. In the growth stage, it becomes all about market share. So marketing managers will tend to shift their focus, trying to capture as much share as possible. And that's what's going to set them up for success in subsequent stages of the product's life cycle. In the maturity stage, oftentimes it's about maintaining profit. And if you think about it, well, what makes up profit? One piece that makes up profit is cost, and that revenues minus costs equals profits, right? And so what managers will try to do is they'll start scaling back some of their promotions, start scaling back some of their advertising, start to realize some cost savings, which will help them maintain profits for as long as they can. And once we go into decline, it's all about eking the last little profit that you can from this product that you introduced a long time ago. So the product life cycle is almost a foundational theory that managers will oftentimes rely on to give them a perspective into what's happening with their products and to help them orient themselves towards the correct strategies that they need to be deploying as the product goes through its various stages in its life cycle. So as we've talked about today, there's a lot of fun and exciting things to learn when it comes to the development of products and the management of products. Both have to go hand in hand in order for companies to be successful. Now, if you'd like to learn more about these types of topics, Marketing 450 goes by the name of Product Development and Management, which is in fact a course that I teach, is the type of course where we do a deep dive into the product development process, spending almost half a semester, in fact a little bit more, really understanding what are the strategic options available to us, understanding the tactics that we can deploy to make ourselves successful. And then we start to focus on the product management piece, where we go back to product lifecycle theory and then expand from there and really augment our thinking that will allow us as managers to be successful down the road. I encourage you to go through the chapter in the textbook to review some of the other material in there. Have a nice day.